Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. Now we're going to be talking about the continent of Africa and a specific country, Nigeria, but looking at Africa as the new norm, what's going to be happening as we move towards 2050, as the continent just within 5 short years went from about 850 million population to now over 1.2 billion. That's how fast the population growth is on the continent. And they expect to be over 2 billion, possibly even by 2030. So it's a very fast growing area. Some of the largest growth economies on the planet are on the continent of Africa. And we're going to be talking about that. And someone who's a true expert, spending virtually all of her adult professional life working on the African continent, is Courtney Ashley Vaughn, principal of Courtney Vaughn LLC, and also the producer of what's called Farm to Market magazine. Courtney, welcome back to the Emerald Planet.
And thank you, Dr. Hancock.
And
Thanks for having me.
Been a long time since you've been with us, and we're glad to have you back. Tell us a little bit about the mission and the vision, both of Courtney Vaughn LLC and the Farm to Market magazine, and then we'll get into our topic about what's happening on the continent.
Okay, thank you again. And as you know, Courtney Vaughn LLC is a strategy consultancy firm that's located here in Washington, D.C., and that provides different services around the world, especially in the area of management consulting and transaction. And it cuts across, we do work across many sectors, industry, and in over 40 countries. Now, the company itself has gone through a transformation, right, where we take some time off while we're doing projects at a smaller scale to be able to put in place infrastructure so we can be a little bit more efficient in conveying and carrying information to our clients, right? Everybody is now using sensors and big data, and the internet really have provided that opportunity for us. So Farm to Market magazine is one of what I call the intellectual assets that we have created to be able to penetrate the agriculture sector and sectors that link into the agriculture sector to get information to our clientele and others.
Yeah, and the whole thing about agriculture is the majority of the population on the African continent are in some type of agriculture. And actually they're saying the new green jobs of the 21st century actually is in agriculture, forestry, fisheries, all these types of things that are essential for the population. We are adding 2 billion new people to the planet by 2050, so we got to be able to feed them. And so focusing on agriculture and all the related industries is really critical to that. But we have your logo up here, and I'm going to make this statement, a sweeping statement. Africa is a continent, not a country. Now, I know that to be true. Why are you making such a sweeping statement, and you bring that up over and over? Why? What's the purpose?
I am making that statement for many reasons, but particularly because over my last 2 decades working in development, and particularly in Africa, I evaluate a lot of reports for financing and projects for financing, and there's people still, whether you're on the continent or you are in the United States or other way, people still refer to Africa as if it is a country,
That's
so when you talk about
correct.
GDP, when you talk about population and other variables, right? If you are not clear that there are 54 countries on that continent, right? And a lot of time people are talking in the development context about sub-Saharan Africa, which by UNDP definition, it's around 46 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So I feel that it's very important and it's relevant, especially now we're moving into data system with robotics, that we can define, the continent according to what the true definition is.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it, if you look at the technologies going on around the world as far as drones, artificial intelligence, big data, the cloud. I mean, all of that is on the African continent. It's just the fact that they're catching up. But believe me, when half the population is under about 30 or 35 years of age, one half of all that population, is that they're going to be catching up at a very rapid rate.
Most certainly.
And so they're leaping time, you know, just like with the cell phones and now with the drones and all the other IT that they have access to. But looking at what is the driving force, here's this big continent, 54 nations, very diverse, but it's amazing how the whole continent just seems to fit together as far as the natural resources, you know, even water, soil, and all that. So what are we looking at? What is driving this agricultural transformation?
This is what is driving the transformation of agriculture. First of all, the countries that are endowed with fossil fuels, like Nigeria, Angola, those sorts of countries, right? A large percentage of their GDP, the income of the country, oil is a contributor to that. And with the volatility in oil, and this has been going on since oil has been around since the 70s, etc. But most recently, over the 2014 period to 2016, 17, Nigeria has gone through serious economic shock, and Angola, and countries all the way over to the other part of the world, like Venezuela, right? Because oil, again, is the dominant player. So as it relates to, so to say that income diversification is something that is necessary in many African countries, and you can see where agriculture, again, since a lot or the majority of the population is involved with agriculture, even though they may be more subsistence farmers, right? They're looking now to bring those into context. And the demographic, I must say that the demographic change that we see, the characteristic of the demographic, you mentioned earlier that the youth population is growing, right? It is said that by 2030, that the significant amount of youth population is going to be on the continent of Africa, and Niger is going to have it will be one of the countries with the largest population of youth. So you can imagine food security has to be an issue, right? Because we have to feed people.
Yeah, looking at the map here, this is Nigeria. It's now just within about 1 year, they went from official status of 186 million population to more now than 195 million.
Yes.
That was just within the last 6 months. So, I mean, the numbers literally are just galloping. I mean, it's just amazing. But if you look at the diversity of Nigeria, of course, they have the oil revenues, they brought in trillions of dollars, but yet it's still, in many ways, an agricultural country.
And it is.
And it's a large country, and we're looking at it right here. Tell us a little bit about why Nigeria is so diverse and how that is going to then impact as far as what we're looking at as agricultural transformation away from just total dependence on oil, natural gas as well, into ag and other industries.
Okay, Nigeria is diverse when it comes on to the different ethnic group and culture and language and religion, those sorts of things, right? But again, as it relates to the economics, right, the statistics speak for themselves, right? It's still truly dependent on oil, right? And but at the same time, given that this new president, and he's not so new, President Buhari came in 2015, and part of it is strategic objectives, right? The portfolio that he has really is to impact, you know, to contribute to youth employment. For example, unemployment is very large again in Nigeria, so we feel that the agriculture is a space, right, that if one does things properly, we can look at the various, you know, the supply chain
let's jump ahead.
And manufacturing.
Let's talk about women.
And those sorts of
let's
things.
talk about women in the economy and how they're going to really be a driving force as far as ag is concerned.
Okay.
And we're looking at some of those, and we're just going to throw some of these slides out here, but looking at women and girls in the economy.
Okay, well, women have always, and we have had it start before, played a significant role in Nigerian African economies, okay? They may be in the smaller business sector, micro sectors, right? If they're in energy, they may be the women who are selling the coal in the market, for example. That's part of the old agro system, so to speak, right? There are women who are running major institutions. The former finance minister of Nigeria, prior to Buhari, 2015, is Dr. Ngozi, World Bank director, okay? She was managing managing the country in Botswana. You have a central bank governor, Lena, who has been there for the last probably since I came to Washington, which was 20 years ago, because I met her on in that case, right? So I feel that there is a little bit of misconception as to what role women are playing in African society. Liberia has a leader who is also a female. You have the different ministers in various, places around Africa, from North Africa to North Africa, Egypt, actually, as a female finance minister.
Let's jump back in. What we're looking at here, this is something that we're going to be talking about later, how they're actually trying to go from oil, natural gas, the fossil fuels, into renewables and to generate new ways of, in essence, powering the whole country. Okay. And you're a true expert in that because you were part of the West Africa Power Pool, and we're looking at what the next vision is of that. And that really directly relates to agriculture. So people are saying, electricity, agriculture, where do they meet? Where do they meet?
Okay, this is where they meet. I feel that again, because African countries are looking for the value added in agriculture per se, and value added means that one probably will have to store things, maybe in cold storage, right? Manufacture, food processing, and those things take electricity.
And also irrigation and even processing food.
Exactly, most certainly. So I feel, again, a country like Nigeria with just under around 10,000 megawatts of electricity for such a large population, with the vision, again, to be able to scale up and industrialize, and she has to bring the infrastructure in place, and electricity is one. So my experience from the West Africa Electricity Power Pool, it lends to, how I can contribute in the agriculture sector, because I have actually worked in most of the countries in Africa, and in particular in West Africa, 14 of those countries.
Yeah, and looking at this, rice is really a staple as far as that is concerned. So what are the three key challenges that you see as far as moving forward? We got to be quick. We only have a minute left.
Moving forward with rice, Nigeria is one of the largest, if not the largest, eater of rice. So the big challenge there, again, is the infrastructure to manage that. And infrastructure could mean soft or hard infrastructure.
Okay. And looking at where we're going to be over the next 5, 10 to 15 years as they move away from what we're seeing right here into where they're going by 2050, what do you see for the growth and expansion in Nigeria?
If Nigeria invests and leverage and diversify appropriately now, that is the word, appropriately, I feel that she will be able to meet some of the goals and objectives. The key one, which is to put those youth into employment. And I think that will solve a lot of the problems.
And also educate them for the new economy and not just what was before, particularly in the old colonial days with all the examinations and all that.
Yes, I agree with that.
Courtney Ashley Vaughn, she's the principal of Courtney Vaughn LLC, producer Farm to Market magazine. And we're talking about agriculture on the African continent, how it's going to lead the future for a green economy as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Leaving hot coals improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown and feel technique. After the first drown, a good start. Next, another drink. And finally, a close feel.
Is it cool? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Smokey, catch! Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
I'll never forget the day our landlord called and said, read your lease. No pets allowed. My owner tells him my dog ate the lease, but that didn't work. And now I'm stuck in a shelter. But this pit bull is ready for a new crib. I'm loving, loyal, and play well with others. So don't be intimidated by all my muscles, because the biggest one I have is my heart. That's right, I said it.
I dare you. I dare you to change the world. Yeah, you. Getting that college education.
I dare you to be somebody important.
Like be a teacher or a reality TV star.
I dare you to stand up here.
To call the shots.
To be a role model.
An inspiration. An innovator.
To be a teacher.
Think you can change my life? Make me excited about science like you?
Have a career that really means something?
Then do it.
I dare you.
They say you don't have to be so strong, but this is my mother, my purpose. Strength is not optional. See, I lift her now like she raised me then, so I know my strength is super, but I'm still human.
Oh, look who's here.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we look around the globe on a week-to-week basis looking for those 1,000 best practices, what we call the best of the best, or the solutions that are making a difference as we go through the 21st century. And we have the motto is that we're looking for the 1,000 best practices, but now we've actually almost at about 3,000 such best practices that are being used in over 103 different countries that we've been able to identify, and we're searching for new ones every day. But we're going to be really focusing on the continent of Africa and looking at what's happening there. This is a continent, as we call within Emerald Planet, Africa Fast Forward, because they're moving at a rapid rate. In about 5 years, they went from about 850 million people to over 1.2 billion. They have some of the fastest growing economies on the planet. They have almost 50% of the population of the continent are considered youth, and they fit together, all these 54 countries, just almost like hand in glove. And we have someone who's a true expert in all that, and we have many slides to share with you, but this is Stephanie Race. She's the CEO and founder of what's called Crop Performance Limited. And she's coming in by Skype and sitting right beside me as our good long-term friend that's been with us for many years. And welcome back to the Emerald Planet.
Thank you.
Is Courtney Ashley Vaughn. She's the principal of Courtney Vaughn LLC and producer of Farm to Market magazine. Courtney, welcome back.
Thank you.
And Stephanie, welcome to Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you for having me.
We're really glad to have you. Tell us a little bit about Crop Performance. We have your logo up here. What's its mission and vision? And how is it really aiding in revitalization and or the reform of economies, but particularly the agricultural economy on the African continent?
Crop Performance is developed this digital platform that leverages satellite remote sensing technology for agriculture to forecast yield, quantify supply risk, and optimize genetic potential and monitor variety performance of crops globally. We developed the initial technology for this company in 2008 and started the business in the United States, moved it to Europe, and been working in the African continent for the last 4 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking at this map here where you got 54 different nations, it's a huge continent. In some ways, it fits together nicely, but it really, even within countries, can be a real problem getting around. So why choose the whole continent of Africa to be doing your work? I mean, that's really a mighty task.
So we started by recognizing each African country is at a different stage of its development. Mm-hmm. And the other consideration is climate change is affecting different countries at a different pace relative to changing weather patterns, as well as the suitability of soils to grow different crops. That is all of the evaluation on the supply side. On the demand side, we have large imbalances of food demand versus crop availability in individual countries. You were talking about Nigeria just earlier today, and Nigeria consumes 5 million metric tons more rice than they produce. So there's a huge trade imbalance across the African continent, and each individual country is at a different level of trade imbalance relative to its own individual food security, i.e. its ability to produce the food that it consumes as a nation.
Okay, wonderful. Courtney, why don't you ask the next question? And then we're going to get into your slides because you have a tremendous amount of information. Courtney?
Okay, Stephanie, glad that you're here. So here's a question. What are you aiming to achieve through your company, Crop Performance, and how will this help researchers, agriculturists, and policymakers across the African continent?
Crop Performance is focused on closing something we call the yield gap, which is the productive performance of land in terms of its capacity versus its historical production. So if you look across the African continent, in some cases, there's a 90% yield gap. So our objective is to essentially work with farming producers on the ground in the entire supply chain to produce more food, less resources. And part of the way we overcome the current deficit of knowledge is through our information management platform, which is big data, it's space technology, it's Internet of Things, it's the cloud, it's all the things you can imagine. But the point is that individual producers have the ability to access the same data in Africa that they would if they were individual producers, say, in the UK or in the US. And what we've done in Africa is we've initially focused on value chains that are unique to Africa, like coffee, tea, cacao for the chocolate industry, as well as food security crops like rice and maize that are critical to feeding the people of both Nigeria and Kenya. We're also working on the development of a beer supply chain in Ethiopia. So some of the transformation that we're involved in is being driven by in-country food processing and the desire for more of a Western diet.
Now, looking at this map of farming systems, what do you mean farming systems? And we see all these various colorations within this. Why is this important, and how are you dissecting the continent, not by nations or even tribal areas, but by ways of actually farming or producing food?
So the continent itself is divided into something we call agroecological zones, which are essentially characterized by soil types and different weather patterns. And so historically, food production in Africa has been driven based upon local needs and desires of the individual people, as opposed to growing the crops that are most suitable for the soils and weather that exists from a geographical point of view. The opportunity now is to help Africa rebuild its primary production in both the commercial context as well as mapping it to this agroecosystem view so that you can optimize soil and weather based upon what crops are best suited to grow in which environment.
Now, looking at this map here, we have these very intense colors. Tell us why these colorations and the intensity of that in this agroeconomic areas.
So the dark purple represents soil moisture. So that's where at the tropics where you have a lot of rainfall and precipitation that's happening over the course of the year. So when we start to look at crop water demand for things like rice, we're seeing the shift of the Sahara Desert actually creep into the Sahel. So we have less and less land to grow rice on, which is a really big problem between Nigeria, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. They're net importers of rice now. They can't produce enough to actually address their own food demand. And with climate changing, the agroecosystems are starting to shift south, which has a very big impact on the future capacity to grow food in Africa.
Now, the whole thing about the African continent, as well as most of the world, like the United States, we think of the United States as a huge open country, a lot of open areas, yet 80% of our population actually live in urban areas. And the African continent is urbanizing actually at a more fast rate than what the United States did and many other what we now consider developed countries. So looking at the number of people that are spreading out because of population growth, but also urbanization, how is that impacting the land that they actually have left to even farm?
So there are initiatives in 4 or 5 different African countries that are focused on reorganizing land use. So you have both population growth in places like Nigeria and other African countries in Ethiopia and Kenya. You also have limited access to farm certain crops given available water. The other thing that's happening is we have biodiversity conservation. So we have a lot of endangered species in the continent of Africa, and then they're urbanizing their infrastructure. So they need transport networks to join up the different cities within a country. So for example, in Kenya, there is a big program that's focused on the trade-offs between agriculture, forestry, biodiversity, and habitat for animals versus where people will live. So,
and also looking at this too, you see the intensity as far as climate change. What is climate change actually doing to not only the food patterns and population growth, but even the sustainability for the animals? Because Africa is known for huge, numbers of animals.
So we have issues with degraded forests and questions about water availability for both plants and animals, whether it's crops, livestock and food crops, or we're talking about endangered species. So there's more constraints on common resources for multiple end uses. I think that's the best way of characterizing it. An example would be during the recent drought in Ethiopia, all of the livestock started emigrating from southern Ethiopia into northern Kenya and started grazing on private land. And there was a big to-do about, is that legal or not? And what do you do when the Ethiopian farmers are out of forage crops? They need to move the animals to a place where they can graze them. So they came across the border to Kenya and started grazing crops there. So I think this whole question about the governance of resources as it relates to areas that are at risk really needs to be thought through in the context of how each African country is developing its own economy.
Yeah, and the whole thing about looking at the 54 nations, those were artificially drawn in most cases as far as the boundaries are concerned. They went through landforms, rivers, population centers, ethnic groups and all that. So there's a lot of these legacies that have been left over from the colonial days that are now having real impacts as far as real people on the continent.
Yeah, and the other thing is the transformation from an oil and gas and mining economy in terms of where the GDP is. It's been coming out of mineral resources and oil and gas as opposed to agricultural commodities, soft commodities. Not necessarily just for export, but to create a food industry for Africa unto itself. And so I think that's the real opportunity, is to have Africa lead in the food and beverage industry by creating its own national and multinational companies from within Africa. And we hope to be part of that transformation.
Well, and also too, looking at this as far as the crops and this transpiration as far as rain and all these other kinds of things. I mean, the continent itself is really changing, but we've absolutely run out of time. So what do you see as far as the growth and expansion of the urban areas versus rural, and how is this rural-urban dynamic going to play out, say, over the next 5, 10, 15 years? And we have to be quick. We got about 30 seconds.
What we see in terms of urbanization of Africa is different cities are requiring more protein and more Western diet faster than environment is the planet.
Okay, we're going to lose you. This is Stephanie Ray. She's CEO and founder of Crop Performance Limited. And sitting right beside me is our good friend and colleague, Courtney Ashley Vaughn, the principal of Courtney Vaughn LLC, producer, Farm to Market Magazine. Thank you for being with us as we look at these very complex issues and challenges on the African continent as we create the Emerald Planet.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
I dare you. I dare you to change the world. Yeah, you. Getting that college education.
I dare you to be somebody important.
Like be a teacher or a reality TV star.
I dare you to stand up here.
To call the shots.
To be a role model.
An inspiration. An innovator.
To be a teacher.
Think you can change my life? Make me excited about science like you?
Have a career that really means something?
Then do it.
I dare you.
They say you don't have to be so strong, but this is my mother, my purpose. Strength is not optional. See, I lift her now like she raised me then, so I know my strength is super, but I'm still human.
Oh, look who's here.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome again to the Emerald Planet as we look around the globe, and a globe that's going to grow to maybe 12 to 13 billion people by the end of this century. And we'll have about 2 billion more people on the planet by 2050. So how are we going to provide the food, the fuel, the fiber, all the basic infrastructure such as roads, healthcare, education, transportation, all the things that people need? And the real experiment on planet Earth now is the continent of Africa. 54 nations, very diverse, very young population, yet they want and demand what all the developed nations have had for the last 150 plus years, and they want to join the real League of Nations as having their share of the natural resources, but at the same time the benefits of modern society. And I have someone sitting right beside me that's been involved in this for many years, actually most of her professional life. This is Courtney Ashley Vaughn. She's the principal of Courtney Vaughn LLC and producer of Farm to Market magazine. And so looking at Farm to Market magazine, what is the purpose of that, and how does this fit into this new transformation on the African continent of looking at agriculture really as a future, not just something way in the past, future jobs, and also future businesses?
Okay, thank you for having me again, Dr. Hancock. Farm to Market magazine is an intellectual asset of Courtney Vaughn LLC. Today, you know, again, we're in the big data business, right? The world has a lot of data. People are moving information very quickly. So we're using it as a mechanism to communicate information to the various clients that we have in different parts of the world, in particular in Africa and Nigeria. And since we have a database of information, primary data, secondary data on the agriculture sector and the infrastructure, different sectors that links the agriculture, such as road, communications, electricity, for example, right? We are using it to be able to, you know, distribute information to key stakeholders that need those information there.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it, and I was just in India, I traveled around most of the country, and what you see there is 500 million people within the India itself are in agriculture. Yes. And so when you look at the transformations going on there as far as the percentage of cell phones use, use of big data, accessing the internet, it's amazing how this is actually happening in the agricultural communities, and how that they are actually creating their own social media. So looking at this whole thing as far as big data, cloud, you know, computing, storage, and all that, and also social media, how does the African continent see itself moving forward, you know, across all many different sectors, but specifically in agriculture, to meet the needs of feeding this new population growth on the continent, but also to be able to export to earn hard earnings instead of just petrochemicals?
Okay, so the African countries, again, there are 54 countries there, and the ones that have petrochemical as a major contribution of their gross domestic product per se. They are diversifying, and they're actually reinvesting and investing significantly in the agriculture sector. Information is already on the ground. They're leaning on institutions that have already established information sets, right? We're using those information to do projections. We were on early with crop performance. You can see that's a U.S. company, a scientist, entrepreneur who is on top of what is going on in Africa. So we have this collaboration among various people in the world who want to see that African people are fed, okay? After all, it's a large part of the world's population, like you mentioned. You had mentioned earlier, we're going to have 9 billion people by a certain point in time, and a significant amount of that is going to come out of Africa, almost 2 billion of that, and the youth population, again, there's a significant amount that is coming out of Africa and out of a country called Nigeria.
Now, this whole thing of the types of skills that are needed, we're looking at the African continent, but also this is something through the West Africa Power Pool, but this is really something as far as technologies that's spreading across the whole continent of Africa. Yes. You have the African Union that's very active there and bringing in experts, subject matter experts, but actually the Africans are going out, gaining those skills and coming back, almost like Japan, Korea, China, even Vietnam, Thailand. We're doing over many years, the African nations are doing a similar kind of thing. So what are they reaching for out in the world, and what are they actually bringing back to the continent, just like we're seeing this model right in front of us, that's going to change the dynamic for all of Africa, the whole continent, not just a particular nation.
And I'm glad you're asking that question. Maybe over the last decade or 15 years, there has been a movement from the diaspora into Africa to be able to transfer knowledge, by way of management in various sectors, right? A lot of people from the diaspora have gone into high-level government position in financial institutions. And what is important here?
Even heads of state.
And even heads of states, right? Nigeria's finance minister, Botswana finance minister, females, Liberia, president of Liberia, and so on and so forth. But even the very development institutions that were there for a long time, helping African nations in many different ways, they have also built up institutional capacity on the ground, right? You now have the Africa Development Bank and many other regional and sub-regional institutions that they're not only bringing money, but expertise and knowledge, okay?
And then also technology.
And technology, and technology, especially communications technology, the advancement of mobile telephony into African societies, right? That has really helping to scale up and to have reach, right? And to be on top of
Well, they've leaked time because if you look at Congo DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, supposedly when the Belgians marched out in 1963, there was a phone system of 10 to 15,000 phones. And yet, now, over almost 80% of the whole population have cell phones within a short period of time.
Yes.
All private.
Yes.
Nothing in the public sector. And it's amazing, but if you look at the dynamic of this technology, and that's why I was emphasizing technology, this is a rice processing plant in Nigeria.
Yes.
And this is the latest technology you can find on the planet. So how is a country like Nigeria, but many other nations doing a similar kind of thing, able to reach out, bring in these new technologies, even when the population base is expanding? How do you balance that? The numbers of people in fast growth, but yet bringing in all this technology.
Right, the technology are mainly coming these days through partnership relationships with whether you're a small business or a large business. We have China that has technology. They may be not the quality as in the United States or European countries, right? But they're on the ground. Indians are on the ground in every sector, again, whether it's energy, renewable energy technology, right? Clean, efficient technology, or in water, or in roads, or in education, right? Different countries, again, have collaborated. Africa is a great market. We know the future of markets seems as if in terms of consumerism, again, is in Africa. And again, if one looks at the young population that is coming up and is expanding. So I feel that to just summarize here, this is not a journey that started yesterday, right? It started before you have mobile telephony increase in, say, a country like Nigeria in 2001, mobile telephony and telephone system, fixed wireline, was around 3 million in the country. Today, you have over 100 and something million mobile telephony. And it's not like in a developed economy like United States where you have a choice, fixed wireline versus mobile. It's mobile, especially in rural society, and people are using it in different ways.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it is really the mobile phone when you go in. I've been in Tanzania and about 18 different countries now on the
Yes.
African continent, and they're using it for everything.
For everything.
So from the
Commerce,
late night
yes.
flashlight all the
Yes.
way up through,
Yes.
they're looking at the stock futures in the United
Most
States.
certainly.
They're looking at the price of rice in Vietnam and the
yes.
Philippines and Thailand for competition. So, but also too, at the same time, all this is going on for the economy. They're really trying to move forward as far as protecting the environment, trying to start reversing climate change because they are closer to it than most people in the United States or Western Europe or even Japan. And so how are they balancing so that you have the economy, the environment, civil society development all being brought in balance, and how is this experiment playing out? Are you seeing it play out across the African continent?
Yes, you do at various levels. And let's look at the enterprise level, for example, right? I had an opportunity of working with it's a small business, but a portfolio of different companies in farm and rice milling and cassava milling last year. And my observation has been there's an integrated system when you process the rice, from the rice coming into the plant, right, and going through the various mechanics of processing, washing, polishing, and even the husk that you take off the rice. They use that as a secondary way to produce electricity, right?
Biomass.
With steam, biomass. And the bottom line, again, because of the irregularity and volatility of electricity from the grid, there is no choice. They have to do that, okay, to be able to, again, do business and sustain business.
Yeah, I want to go back to this because this is the milled rice. And of course, this is something now that they're trying to increase the productivity as far as the rice, within Nigeria, again, to wean themselves off, but not have to spend all their foreign currency on feeding their own people. But yeah, when you go over and we'll pop over, going into this as far as taking that husk off and then using it as a biomass, what innovation are you seeing there in these kinds of companies? And we have about one more question, so let's answer that.
Well,
we'll move forward.
the guys are using the husk, again, to be able to support their electricity fuel base, right? That's one of the things that they're doing. It's helping them also to diversify their revenue stream. You can use the husk for chickens to lay eggs on, that sort of thing, and many other things. And these things, I feel, is very important to the sustainability of the enterprise sector, because when you have just one income, right, in countries that are very risky, at least are perceived to be politically risky, and they're all looking outside of Africa to help them to finance enterprises as well as the country, okay? It's good that, they're being innovative, they're reading, they're thinking, right?
Well, the
And
whole thing
they're
about
looking
this, if you look at these, I worked with many companies over the years in the United States, and whether they were in forestry, they were in chemicals, they were in even weaving mills and things like that, much of their main revenue as far as profit came out of their power production. They were actually selling
Most
back into the grid.
Right.
And so you're seeing this same thing on Africa. Let's go out with having the husk in the hands here and all that. What do you see for the expansion of this kind of integrated system, diversification, but a new economy on the African continent?
Yes, definitely. They're getting a little bit more innovative and creating new revenue streams with these technologies, right? They have brains. In fact, they're doing R&D themselves right inside those establishments.
That's
those enterprises.
absolutely fantastic. This is Courtney Ashley Vaughn, Principal, Courtney Vaughn LLC, producer, Farm to Market Magazine. Congratulations, by the way, in getting this going. And thank you for being with us as we're looking at the experiment, really, of the African continent as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Take a look under your bed. Find stuff under there? What about jobs? No? Now try your closet. Still no jobs? Just more stuff? Well, you really have both. See, stuff is defined as household articles considered as a group. Sometimes this stuff is no longer needed. Wait, no longer needed? That can't be right. Because remember those jobs you were looking for? Those are really needed. And they're the stuff inside your stuff. Our job is to unlock those jobs. And it starts when you donate your stuff to your local Goodwill. Here's how we do it. When you donate to Goodwill, we sell your stuff to provide job training for people right here in your community. So just by teaming up with Goodwill, you help create jobs. And isn't that worth parting with the leftover keytar from your 80s cover band? Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs.
We just finished dinner and it was time for homework. He hates homework. I know he's bright.
Why is it so hard for me?
He's
I'm
just
trying
gotta
as
try a
hard
little
as
harder.
I can.
1 in 5 children struggle with learning and attention issues. Go from misunderstanding to understood.org.
It's me, Artie. Come see what I collected from the Creative Galaxy in my idea box.
Transform your world.
Will you help me make art?
Before you throw it away,
Hey, I have an idea.
think outside the box.
Go be amazing!
Give your cardboard box another life. Recycle.
Most party fouls? Not a big deal. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations looking for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, products, and processes as we move through the 21st century. And we're looking at the continent of Africa, the 54 nations, and how it really is maybe a model for developed nations and those middle-income nations that are struggling right now to feed themselves, to provide the basic infrastructure as far as housing, transportation, even education and health care. But there's a lot of dynamic things going on the continent of Africa, and we actually have 2 experts sitting with us. One is coming all the way across the country from California, Stephanie Race, CEO and founder of Crop Performance Limited. She's coming by Skype. And then right beside me, my good friend and colleague, Courtney Ashley Vaughn, principal, Courtney Vaughn LLC, and the principal of the Farm to Market magazine. And Stephanie, I'm going to start off with you since you're coming the longest distance, and thank you for being with us on Emerald Planet TV. But tell us, as the African continent moves forward, you've got a rapidly growing population. Half of the population is considered youth, and they're in many cases very well educated. But many of them, instead of immigrating like their forefathers, they want to stay on the continent and contribute to their society. So how is the cloud, big data, the Internet of Things, the Internet of information, the Internet of innovation taking hold there, or maybe has already taken hold, and propelling the continent forward in all these 54 nations?
We see the youth getting very proactively engaged in agriculture, primarily because there is a lot of activity on the ground in countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, to name just a few, where young entrepreneurs, they're calling them agri-entrepreneurs, are now leveraging mobile platforms, big data, satellite technology to create solutions for farmers on the ground. They realize that their opportunity to contribute to the economy is both through technology as well as in establishing African food systems that they can become part of.
Yeah, looking at this, and this is something, Courtney, you provided. I really love this. You have, the continent, you have the hands and all that. But tell us why this is so important that, to look at it as 54 individual nations instead of looking at Africa as a country.
It's important because one needs to, for your own education, know that you have 54 countries out there that's very diverse as it relates in religion, in different cultures, languages, right, and population, and the various. It's true that they do have some of the similar natural resources, but some of them are so different in that regard. And we are in the West, and we're looking to engage them, right? So the more we understand about those countries, right, you have Anglophone Africa, you have Francophone Africa, you have Africans that speak Portuguese, because the Portuguese were there also, right, over in, probably Angola, and probably Spanish up to Equatorial Guinea, and even a country like Cameroon with French. There is some German-speaking people there also, because those people came a long time ago. So I think it's very important. Culture, you know, even to understand culture and how to do business, right? One can't just think that it's one, what you call homogeneous society, so to speak.
Yeah, well, they're far from that. And even within countries like a Nigeria,
Yes.
then you pop to the Eastern Africa and Kenya. I mean, you have all these different population
Yes.
bases, these and very unique cultures and languages and religions and all that. And they've been living together for thousands of years, and they're quite different.
Yes.
And this is one thing of traveling on the continent I've really learned. Stephanie, looking at SDGs, what is an SDG? And what SDGs will you be able to service, or are you servicing?
The SDGs are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that were created in 2015. And there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we are actively involved in addressing SDGs, both in Africa as well as in other continents. And we've had a significant role in helping the academics that are behind the United Nations to create the standards for metrics and measurement of establishing, have we actually solved any of these SDGs and how do we report on them?
Now, looking at this photograph here, and I'm using this because this is a young man, and behind him is his family. They're out gathering the rice and all that. How many different of the SDGs are we addressing just through this type of photograph right now?
At least about 6. So contributing to the end of extreme poverty, eliminating hunger and malnutrition, addressing issues around water scarcity, becoming a net exporter of agricultural commodities, and moving to the top of the agricultural value chain are some of the SDGs and some of the enablers that will help the SDGs be addressed in the context of African agriculture transformation.
Yeah, and there are many, actually probably the majority of the people are really small landholders, but you know, there's more European, American, and specifically Chinese that are coming in and actually either leasing or buying up the land. How is that impacting, Courtney, what's really going on with these people that we're looking at here that are these small landholders, small farmers, but very large families?
Well, the small farmers really are very happy to engage foreigners, okay? Because the resources, some of the resources that is needed not just again to finance the business, but to manage the business and to scale up those businesses are not necessarily in the country, right? You're talking about countries that have these 17 SDGs, and it does not mean that the SDGs are not for developed economies, because they are. It's for the entire world, right? Of people to be able to fight poverty, feed yourself, have access to electricity, water, and so on and so forth, okay? So you see that there is a fiscal challenge there for countries. And when you're talking about something like climate change and climate infrastructure financing, you can just imagine here's a continent where people have been depressed in a sense, right? Monetarily, etc., and now they're looking to break out, and now you have these environmental issues and many things that were probably even caused from the West, right? Using certain sort of carbon, processes and industrialization, and they, in a sense, have to always integrate that in their development plan. It become a burden to them financially. So to engage and bring foreigners in at any level is something that African countries are very open to.
Stephanie, I'm going to leave this up here as far as these SDGs because this is of great interest, but addressing this, how can the Africans themselves look at these and say, okay, the West imposed many things on us over the last 400 or 500 years. We are now developing and moving forward at a very rapid rate. We have a young population. They're being as well educated as possible. How can they move and address these 17 areas on their own and pick and choose, kind of like what Japan did back in the 1950s and 60s, China's done in the 70s and 80s, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, many Asian countries have done the same kind of thing. And now Africa as a continent is starting to reach out and do these things, bring in what they need, forget the rest. How do we do that? How are they doing that?
So the catalyst for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is actually through public-private partnerships. And we've had a role in taking expertise from the private sector, whether it's an African food company or a multinational food company that wants to build a vertically integrated supply chain within Africa for both African consumption of those food or beverage products or for export. And we've used those integrated value chains as a catalyst for overcoming the gap in knowledge. So part of this is like teaching a fisherman how to ship fish or teaching a farmer how to farm. And so they know their lands, but if they had better information on seeds and fertilizers, how to bring fertility back to the soil, they could make their land more productive and start to climb up something we call to become a commercial farming enterprise. One of the big challenges with getting the private sector engaged in Africa has to do with getting over the fact that they perceive geopolitical risk. And this has been left to the development community for many, many years. Now what we see is there are consumer markets for these products, whether it's beer in Ethiopia, French fries in Kenya, chocolate products in West Africa, or taking food security crops like maize and rice and creating high-value products from them for using in-country processing so that the consumers in Africa can actually access their own resources in an integrated way to feed themselves.
You know, and the whole thing about that too is they're inventing new projects. You know, we have potato chips, they have cassava chips, you know, banana chips. I mean, it's just amazing how you can just look at something that may have come over from overseas. You think it's wonderful, and you're saying, you know, we've got 5 or 6 products here that we could just be making our own. Why do we want to import all of this? And I think that's where you're going as far as crop performance, correct?
That's right. I mean, our technology platform closes yield gaps and helps growers globally grow more food with less resources. We see the biggest opportunity in Africa in that the yield gap is very large. So we can help primary producers on the ground, both subsistence farmers and commercial farming enterprises, increase their yields using less resources, which is particularly important given climate change, but connecting them to markets that are national and regional within the African continent will help them create a food economy, and that's what we're focused on.
Now you have this, you know, Farm to Market magazine. This is something you're using as a bridge, a virtual bridge to bring the world together over the continent of Africa. How do you see this dialogue and the reality of the ideas, the solutions you're bringing to people, and we're going to close on this question, is really going to close this gap that Stephanie is just talking about, as far as the intellectual gap, the finance gap, and the development gap?
Yeah, definitely. Those 3 gaps will be reduced, not necessarily closed. It's going to take way more years, maybe another 50 years to do that for many reasons, right? So I feel, again, for the magazine, Farm to Market magazine, it also have an analytic piece of it. It's not a regular magazine you're just reading. There are quantitative analysis that you can do through it, such as project countries, you know, various economic indicators, okay?
Yeah.
So I think we're getting there. Africa is getting there, and it's going to take a little bit more time.
Thank you very much, Stephanie Race, CEO, founder of Crop Performance Limited. By Skype, Courtney Ashley Vaughn, right here beside me, Principal Courtney Vaughn, LLC. And thank you for being with us as we look at this huge continent, many people, great diversity, Africa, as we create the Emerald Planet.